Hey Zena, welcome back to
Hi.
OSO. Really appreciate you taking the time to kind of chat to us. Obviously, you're the resident brand lift study champion, and we all know brand lift study itself, or sort of BLS as we like to call it, helps our customers measure the impact and effect of their ads on LinkedIn relative to their brands. And it does this by using multiple brand metrics like ad recall, aided awareness, brand familiarity, favorability, etc., which we'll obviously go through. Obviously, you've done a great job of leading the charge here. So, would love to gain some insight from you, starting from the tippy top in terms of, first off, what stage do you suggest a brand lift study to the client? Are there specific triggers or flags from them that you look to before actually suggesting this as well?
Yeah, awesome. Hi, everyone. Also happy to be here. Yes, brand lift study nerd. Love the stats behind it. You all know about that. But let's talk about having conversations with customers. So from the outset, like anything, it comes to really good discovery. So questions that can help drive brand lift are all around, what are your growth targets? We know that brand has a really big piece to play when we're looking at long-term or future sales. We also have a look at things like market share as well. Where do you currently sit? How do you maintain it? And then also just having a look at I guess a little bit sort of more down the funnel or is around sort of, are we running lead gen activity and is that converting? And what role does brand play in that? So we know that brand has a 6x on conversion rates. It's a really recited stat that we have at LinkedIn. But often we do have a challenge in our brand messaging that inhibits our lead conversion. So it might be the fact that we are not memorable. So how can we use brand to become more memorable and fall into that consideration set? Or it could be our messaging isn't relevant enough. So how can we measure the effectiveness of that brand to impact how it's driving leads, which is essentially, ROI at the end of the day. So thinking about how you can link those discovery with those outcomes.
Yeah, love it. So using it almost as a bit of a health check to make sure we're hitting each of those different areas of brand and brand awareness, which are ultimately, obviously going to help to ladder up to those marketing outcomes as well. So, I mean, it's probably easiest for us to be able to, kind of get our head around exactly what this means. If you would be able to so kindly give us a bit of a demo of the brand lift study dash, and then maybe we can briefly look at, when setting one up, what you're actually which kind of metrics you're looking at to drive that value. But then would love to kind of spend a bit of time in maybe a final result of a brand lift study to show, I guess, how you would actually communicate that back to the client as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let me jump in and just show you really quickly the setup and a couple of call outs in the setup. It is really user friendly, so I won't go through all of the details because you all know Campaign Manager quite well and how to navigate it. One call out I will say though is you can measure more than 2 metrics at a time. Just be conscious that sometimes these budget levels change. So rather than having a number in mind, always double check. It's called me out before. But where I wanted to kind of focus in terms of the setup and a couple of call outs here is, as a baseline, you're always going to have ad recall as your first question. And then you'll have options for your second survey question here. So aided awareness, brand familiarity, favorability, recommendation, and product consideration. And the reason why ad recall is important is because what we're trying to do is measure the effectiveness of our LinkedIn activity on these members on platform. And if we didn't have a strong result in ad recall, but we did have a high result in brand familiarity, for instance, it means that that brand might have a really strong halo effect in market already, and we can't draw that connection as strongly. On the flip, it means that if we do have them both strong, then we can say to the client, we have been able to drive brand familiarity or I guess a brand consideration for our these members because of the ads that we've driven. So we're generating that intent with our audience that we can later harvest into leads. So that would be the main call out here. This is actually new. Nick, you couldn't do this before, but you can actually run it against a particular industry, which is really exciting as well. So that's live update on the platform.
Love it. In terms of, I suppose, those brand metrics, so and the way that they're kind of actually layered in the platform, which obviously makes it a bit easier. How are you sort of taking your clients on, I guess, a bit of a journey with that? And, on top of that, what sort of cadence are you taking them through to ensure they are going on that journey? And it's not just like let's tick a box, it's a one and done.
That's a great question. So first and foremost, I would always recommend before a client gets really excited about implementing a brand lift study, because it is exciting to be able to measure the impact of your activity, right? Particularly when it comes to things like messaging and whatnot. But what you really want to be doing with your client is doing a baseline check. So running a brand lift study right at the beginning before you make any major changes to work out where you're currently at, then define a goal around messaging or content with your client, and then run a second one so you can actually, and they can actually go back to the business and go, hey, look, this is the impact that this specific activity has driven. So that would be my first one, is make sure you got a baseline to measure against. The second one is around that cadence piece. So I would always say keep in mind that you can only run up until 90 days, but try and have a conversation to align your BLS studies with either planning cycles that the client's running or reporting cycles. So if there's a way, from a sales cycle perspective that they're looking at 3 months, then that works quite well. So then you can kind of measure that way. But in sort of the outset, if you need guidance there, I think from a quarterly basis, measuring that across, that works quite well with clients. The second question, because I think you asked me a few questions in the one question, is around taking a client on a journey with these metrics. I think that there's definitely a compulsion or a desire to jump straight to things like recommendation or product consideration, because we can link them more closely with sales, essentially. But what I would say is, okay, they're a little bit harder to get right initially. We want to make sure that we've got the hygiene right. So the platform lends itself quite well in that sense. So we can look at aided awareness first or familiarity first, which is still connected to sales, right? Because we're talking about market share, we're talking about future-proofing future cash flows, we're talking about making sure that we're communicating to in-market customers and out-market customers, and not dropping the ball there. Like awareness and familiarity also helps us with things like reduced churn. So even though the product consideration is probably where they're going to go, making sure that you're using that terminology around reduced churn, etc., up the top, and then getting those fundamentals right from an awareness, and then going down would be the recommendation. So yeah, a bit of a journey.
Perfect. Perfect. That's awesome. And I suppose, you know, with that journey, obviously being able to, I guess, communicate those particular metrics back to, you know, the business, or sort of back to your customer as marketing outcomes, and using those certain things that you mentioned around, you know, increasing market share or reduced churn, you know, certain other things, even time saved for them, and certain other things. And in terms of that cadence piece, you know, I think that's great to see that you're using that both from like I guess campaign outcomes or sort of KPIs where we're looking at more so short term, which may be, you know, a month, a quarter, that 90 days you mentioned, but then also, you know, ROI being, if we're checking in on multiple occasions, it might be a 6 month, it might be, you know, a year down the track, which is just connecting those dots. We're going to be able to see that long-term ROI, which is ultimately what we're going for.
100%, Nikki. All right, I will show you some results now. The reason why we want to zero in on this a little bit is because it is very LinkedIn centric. And we want to be able to have the conversations with our clients so they're meaningful to the client, to the client's business. So here you can see we have relative brand lift is probably the easiest one for the client to understand straight away. So we've got 37.5% uplift. So compared to, so people who have seen the ads are more likely, 37% more likely to recall them. That's great. But what does that actually mean? So what we can see here is we've been able to drive ad recall or claims mental availability from that client, which is really important for you know, future-proofing future cash flow or consideration for purchase. Something else that was really helpful to measure is the actual number of people that were lifted. So we have our RNF figures that we often use, but this adds like another layer. So not only did we reach, you know, 100,000 people, 43,000 of them, we've been able to drive some deeper consideration with. So that's a really, really effective metric there. So qualifying that reach a little bit further. I think
Awesome.
We've got someone dialing in.
Perfect, Zena. Might have to leave it there, but really appreciate the insight into the brand lift study. I think particularly that last point you mentioned is a way for us to be able to sort of translate those metrics into more so marketing outcomes or sort of marketing terminology as well, for them to be able to, I suppose, you know, relay that back to the business and educate the business as well. So awesome.
Can I just add one small one? I know that we're at time. Something that used to be in the platform that isn't at the moment is the cost per lift. That's something that is easily calculated. So how much you spent on the campaign divided by how many lifted members, and that's a really good way to help guide budgets in the future when you're talking about aligning with market share. So that would be a top tip there. But thanks for having me, Nick.
Anytime, Zena. Welcome back. Welcome back anytime. I appreciate it.
No worries. Bye.